22 years ago, on July 5th, 1996, there were world headlines about the first mammal cloned by scientists at the Roslin Institute in Edinburgh, Scotland. After that, 23 other mammal species have also been cloned, including cattle, cats, deer, dogs, horses, mules, oxen, rabbits, and rats. Now, today, on Thursday, January 25th, 2018, comes a new worldwide headline, quote, 2 monkeys are the first primates ever to be cloned, close quote. The 2 long-tailed macaques are identical twins made by Chinese scientists from monkey fetal cells grown in a petri dish. Upon learning this news, the director of the stem cell program at Boston Children's Hospital, Dr. Leonard Zahn, said, quote, we are closer to human cloning than we've ever been before, and that raises questions of where we would want to go from here, close quote. The Chinese scientists started with skin cells from a 9-year-old macaque and inserted them into ovary eggs from which the original DNA had been removed. So that DNA copied genes from the skin cells. The Chinese scientists created 149 early embryos, and about half were healthy enough to insert into monkey mothers. But only 2 live births resulted, and their photograph is all over the world now in today's headlines about this first ever successful cloning of primates. Currently, the cloning technique used to produce the identical twin macaques could not produce human babies, even if that were allowed. Some argue that cloning humans, even for cancer studies and medical therapies, should never be allowed. But there are bets that in the future, human cloning will eventually occur with unpredictable consequences biologically and legally. While many people in the human abduction syndrome say cloning and hybridization have long been used by alien intelligences on and beyond Earth. This is Linda Moulton Howe. Please stay tuned to Earth Files news updates on KGRA Radio and visit every day my science, environment, and real X-Files news website, earthfiles.com, for more on breaking stories about our universe, this solar system, and the planet we live on.
And that's the news brought to you by earthfiles.com. Now back to the program.
Thanks, Race. Ronnie, before the break, John was taking some excerpts from the book, and one of them was a discussion about a large disc. The words large disc was used in Georgia Bruni's book, and that it was ringed by people who were either guarding, watching the disc. Now, in all of your local investigations there, since you first heard about this at the end of December 1980 to this day, have you ever talked with anyone who said they were an eyewitness in Rendlesham Forest, either seeing a ring of people around a large disc or being a person around a large disc?
No, not personally. I haven't. No one I've ever spoke to has come up with that. But I don't know if you can remember, John. I think it was in one of our other shows when we talked about Harry Harris and what Colonel Halter told him about surrounding the...
Yeah, no, yes, definitely. Yeah, we have that on tape. That Harry Harris, definitely was told by Colonel Halt they surrounded a crowd. Yes.
That's right. That was on Suffolk Daily, and this was a discussion about the Rendlesham Forest incident. And Harry Harris joined the conversation from the Manchester studios, and he said that Colonel Halter told him at one time they surrounded a craft and tried to get in it and on it, and it avoided them. That's the only time I've ever heard about a large craft. I mean, Adrian said in the Georgina Bruni interview that it was 30 foot wide, and that was in a small clearing. So this isn't Capel Green, the farmer's field that you call Capel Green. I think we all know where the small clearing is. That's at the back of Capel Green, where they've put the sculpture now, the sculpture of the UFO. That's the clearing. But when Dot went to investigate in the farmers' cottages, there was one family there who had a small child, and she said that she couldn't understand how come such a big craft got into a small clearing like that, and the father told her to shut up and get upstairs. So that's the only other time I've heard about a large craft being in a clearing. Apart from that,
as we were talking during the break, I have done an interview with a mathematician in Connecticut all the way back to 1986 with Larry Warren. And what is interesting is that Larry Warren adds a piece concerning Adrian Bustinza in this way. He said that when he got back to the barracks, that he found Adrian Bustinza crying on a bunk bed. Now, was it after midnight on the 26th, the 27th, or the 28th? I believe that date that has been the consensus is that it was that strange mystery night of the 27th when something happened and Bonnie Taplin, either she drew a gun or somebody drew a gun on her or something happened in the forest. It's a very confusing night and we don't have clarity. But if this did occur, if it was the night of the 27th, it would mean that Adrian Bustinza was exposed to an encounter in the forest with other military people of something like the yellow aspirin that was described in early accounts, and that he called it in Georgina Bruni's book, a yellow fog low on the ground. Now that may be the night of the 27th. If it were, then by December 28th, when John feels compelled to go back out into the forest and he meets up with Charles Halt, and Halt has been there with the men with Geiger counters, light-alls, cameras running, everything. And then it might make sense that Colonel Halt had asked Adrian Bustinza to go to Woodbridge to get light-alls. And he's now coming back, and that might be that he comes, he's now got more light-alls, and Halt says, I want you to go forward with John Burroughs. Maybe they already knew that Adrian had been exposed the night before.
Well, Linda, that would be really hard, because I'll tell you why. If you go back to Bowen's interview on the night she said it all took place, she didn't mention anything about a group of people going out there. She didn't mention anything, neither did Tramontosi, about anything big going on other than the fact that Ball and Tamplin were in the forest, and that, at one point they thought they heard Colonel Halt's name on the radio. Right. But the night we're proposing actually would be the night after the night with Colonel Halt's tape. We're saying it took place on the last midnight shift, okay, which is the 28th into the 29th, okay? At that point, and if you go by military logistics and stuff, first night, an incident took place. They were caught off guard by it. Nobody suspected it. There's Halt found out about it, briefed the wing staff. I guarantee you they were briefed. And they looked at it and like, what do we do with it? Well, there's really not much to say other than these guys are out there. We've heard this or that, but they probably wanted to keep it quiet. Now, they're probably hoping they would do some kind of investigation and it would go away. Second night, it comes back. You have a shift commander get affected by it, it gets relieved of duty. Now you've got a problem, okay? Now it appears they sent Neville's in England out to the area to check on it. They saw lights, went back to the party. Now the wing party gets interrupted, and they send a team out there. This encounter takes place. The tape goes on. Hall talks about how he took Conrad and some people out there that afternoon. Bowen talks about in her interview that when they came back to work that after the one night that there were people up on CSC and everything else. My guess would be if this all took place, and it does sound a lot different than our incident, it happened on the last midnight shift going into the morning of the 29th.
And if that is true, there is a slight consistency here that Warren says he found Adrian Bustinza crying on one of the beds, and then Adrian then pours out a story, and then Warren says, I promised that I would get his story out. And that disconnect around Adrian, who we wanted to have here tonight, would be what exactly does Adrian remember on the record about the night, and there have been other testimonies, and Adrian told you and me this in 2010 in Texas, John, that he saw something at RAF Bentwaters Woodbridge that reminded him of a UFO that he saw in Alaska.
No, it wasn't Alaska. It was California. It was California, Mather Air Force Base. There was nothing to do with Alaska. We've done over that. We've looked at the timeline. Yeah. Adrian even said at one point he'd just been TDY to Alaska, but the actual incident took place outside of Mather Air Force Base in California.
Okay, well, I've got notes that he said at one point that it was that he had an encounter of some sort in Alaska. So I wonder if there was something there and at Mather.
There was never anything in Alaska, Linda.
No, Adrian has said the only thing at Alaska was Northern Lights.
Right. It was Mather where they had the incident. It happened, and if you know the history of Mather, it makes sense what was there and what was going on.
Okay, explain that, John. What is?
I can't go into all the details about Mather Air Force Base, but what the resources that were located there and some of the things that were there and the command that was there would add up to that there could be strange things going on there also. Meaning
related to UFO ET.
Well, strange lights that he saw. I've always been very careful, Linda, and I know I'm not sure what we're dealing with or why, but he did see strange activity at Mather also, yes.
And that's what he referenced then when he said at Bentwaters, he had seen this before.
Yes.
Yeah, that's correct.
All right, now I'm going to finish with the part that came out of the book. He said 2 civilians were taking photographs. Halt ordered Bustinza and 1 other airman to confiscate the cameras. Okay. Again, what I'm trying to say is, number one, I wasn't out there when this took place, okay? But I was, the night I did go out there would have been the 3rd night, the 2nd mid for D-Flight. If all that was going on, I was in the area and would have remembered it. I would have remembered seeing the Breach Police there and some of this other stuff. So none of that adds up to this, what Adrian's telling Georgina. He said other people were taking photographs and filming the event. Bustinza never saw beings, but he saw the outline of something. He remembers Halt facing the craft, talking into his tape recorder. Well, they could say, well, wait a minute, Halt's night with the tape recorder is what was released. Correct, but Halt never went anywhere without his tape recorder. So it's very feasible, whatever his involvement was at ever nights that he was out there and took place, he always had his tape recorder, so he could have been talking into it that night. Then he does say Neville's was out there getting radiation readings. Bustinza never saw it land, but saw it take off. It hovered first and then took off, okay? The UFO was in the clearing 15 to 30 minutes. It was about 30 feet wide with strange markings on its side, hard to define its shape, and it was constantly distorting its shape. As it lifted off, there was no sound, just a cool breeze. The object then lifted off and split into 3 different lights that went in 3 different directions. 20 to 30 people surrounded the craft and other people back at the staging post. Now, there was not 30 people out there when I was out there.
No, John, but if this was a different night, just cast back to the interview done with Rick Doty. What did he say? How many people were interviewed?
No, he did go into some details about different people that were interviewed. I'm not disagreeing with that. But my only point is that's why it was so important to bring him on tonight and try, based on this interview, some other stuff that's come up, what Tim Egershek has said. He said there was activity all 3 midnight shifts. Okay.
Yeah.
We had Bobo on the 2nd night talk about what he saw from the tower, but Tim talks about how he was in the tower on the 3rd night and stuff went on. Okay. That was the night Tim was up there, I believe, wasn't it? When they had speak as people up there in the tower working on equipment and stuff?
I didn't think Tim was up in the tower. I thought he was on the comms.
No, on the second night, but I'm pretty sure Tim was in the tower on the third night. That would be a great clarification, because don't you remember Hastings came up with some information that one of the nights there was comm people up in the tower working on the equipment, the speak ads equipment. Now, that was not Bobo's night. There was nobody up there working on the equipment. So I believe Tim may have very well been in the tower on the third night.
John, on that third night, you think that you didn't get there to where Colt was until like around 3 a.m. Is it possible that between 11 p.m. when D-Flight started assembling and then midnight 2-3, that there could have been other events?
No, because Linda, I was out there way earlier. Okay. And if you listen to the tape, I was out there. I came through the gate right as everything was starting to go on out there. I went down to the East Gate. From the East Gate, I went out to the staging area. At no time did I see any of that activity, okay, that's been described. There were no British police out there. There was none of that going on. To top it all off, remember, even I know I hesitate to bring hypnosis into it, but at no time in the hypnosis did Halt talk about any of that other stuff. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
There was nothing talked about. When I approached their thing, what I remember approaching him, he just talked about the blue lights flying around and that there have been beams of light and some of them were over towards the WSA. He never said we had an encounter, we had all this stuff going on.
And so what you're suggesting tonight is that part of the mystery that we haven't had clear is that we know that you and Jim Peniston and Ed Kavansak were ordered by Bud Steffens to go out into the civilian rendition.
No. Let's do this straight. We weren't ordered, but Bud Steffens couldn't order us to do anything. We observed some stuff in the forest. We called it in, went through CSC. The on-duty shift commander, Lieutenant Baran, after they contacted some radar sites and got our description, ordered us into the forest.
Okay, so Baran ordered in. Steffens was with you when you went.
And Steffens did not want to go out there. And to be honest with you, you would never have done that in the first place, because you never would have taken the two ranking people on a base and sent them out into the forest. Right. You would have left one of the two behind. But ultimately, we were ordered by Lieutenant Baran into the forest on the first night because of the strange lights we were seeing, the fact that the radar from Bentwaters contacted Eastern Radar, and they identified something over the forest that disappeared. And at that point, because of the circumstances behind the radar report and we were seeing strange things, we were ordered to go into the forest with the idea that possibly a small aircraft went down into the forest.
But that night must have come up on everybody's blip, including American intelligence and British, because Central Security Control knew and logged in that for 45 minutes they could not raise any three of you on the radio. Well,
that's the problem, Linda. If you go take a step further, okay, number one, remember what Halt said. He came up on the law enforcement desk and Halt said, don't put anything in the blotters. Or Baran, McCabe said to Halt that Baran said, don't put anything in the blotters. So Halt said, no, put it in the blotters. We had contacted the actual Sergeant Dillard was the comptroller that night. Sergeant Coffey was the guy in charge of CSC that night. They always had two people in CSC. Sergeant Coffey confirmed to us that there was entries made into the report, into the blotter, but they were classified secret immediately. And if you follow the history of this, number one, when they came and asked about the reports, they were told they disappeared, just like the DIS reports and everything else. So supposedly the blotter entries disappeared. Coffey did say they did make entries about this, but we'll never know what was put in the blotters because no one's ever been allowed to see the blotters.
And that's where Colonel Halt told me in a recorded interview in 2009 that he had a colleague who worked when I did the interview at the National Security Agency, and that this is after Halt had retired from the Air Force, and that he called up his friend at the National Security Agency at Fort Meade, Maryland, and said, I feel like I deserve to see the Rendlesham file. And he got invited over there, he said, and that this longtime friend of his had a stack. And Halt said on my audio recording that it was at least 3 feet high, and that it was like dramatically set out there for him to see. And when he started walking toward it with the idea that he was actually going to be able to read what the National Security Agency had on Rendlesham, that his colleague said, no, you can't read it, but I'm showing you the file that we have that you've asked me about.
Right. And now I want to go to the ending of his statement that's key to this, because Ronnie picked this up on the fact that the memo, okay, and neither did the tape describe this taking place, but Halt has talked about this in interviews, and Adrian mentioned it too. Adrian said, as it lifted off, there was no sound, just a cool breeze. The object then lifted off and split into 3 different lights that went in 3 different directions. 20 to 30 people surrounding the craft. But here's the key. Halt has talked about those 3, that it broke into 3 lights, but it wasn't on a tape and it wasn't in the memo. Correct, Ronnie?
That's correct. It's not on the tape. Nowhere. No.
And it's not in the memo. So if, in fact, this took place and Halt confirmed it on his own through interviews, he said that it broke into 3 different things. Why isn't that on the tape? You don't think he would have had the tape on and said, wow, it just broke into 3 different objects?
So it's another night. It must be another night.
Right.
I think it's another night.
Right. And not only another night, but he kept that off the tape. Or we could go a step further. That tape was never been exposed.
Right.
Yeah. Can I just interject something there, John?
Sure.
With his testimony that he gives now, where he says that they followed the light into the Capel Green field, and he says that's where it exploded, and he says it exploded into 5 white lights.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, this is saying 3 white lights, but I don't mean to say, that he got the amount right, but I think...
right, but at no time did Halt mention that either in the memo or did he talk about it on the tape.
And that's why I always thought that must have been what happened to you and Adrian back in the clearing when you had your incident when Colonel Halt allowed you to go forward. Until I read this again today, and I thought, well, this is completely different. Isn't it? This is a completely different incident.
Well, I mean, that very well could be, Ronnie, and I think that it's important to bring this up tonight. I was really hoping Adrian we could really. That's what I really wanted to go into tonight. I wanted to talk about recount what he remembers, which nights, what he remembers, his memories of the 3 midnight shifts that he worked. Egersek said something happened all 3 nights. Did he remember the Templin incident, which would have been night 1 of their mids? The second incident, obviously, he's talked about on Phenomenon Radio about him and I going forward. And what did he remember about the 3rd night? He did tell me he did tell me when we talked on the phone off air that he does remember. There was some stuff that took place on the 3rd night, but I didn't want to corrupt him at all, because what I really wanted to do was bring him on and let him talk about what he remembered, then talk about this interview, because this interview is stunningly different.
Yeah.
Then what?
Can I just say something, John?
Sure.
Listening to what Adrian has said when he's come forward on Phenomenon Radio recently, he's still struggling to remember certain things because he tried to put this all behind him and blank it out of his mind for a long while. And that's obvious that things are slowly coming back to him. I think it's quite possible that some of the testimony he's given to Georgina and some of the testimony that he's told us or Fawcett is mixed up a bit as regards to collecting the lightals and the timing of when he picked things up. But I still think we're looking at 2 completely different incidents. And I know we have to talk about Larry Warren. Bustinza has said on a couple of occasions, and at one time Larry was there, and also when he was on the radio not long ago, he did say something about some lights going around Larry. Well, Larry couldn't have been involved in the night that you was out there and Colonel Halt was out there because he was in Germany, correct?
Well, I'm just saying we tracked the timeline down. based on all the interviews he's done, and it's stunning, folks, if you take the time to go back and look at the interviews and stuff, and that's what Ronnie and I've done, and Ronnie's done a lot more work than I have, including a lot of written and, not videos, but, tape cassette recordings of stuff. It paints a lot different picture in a lot of ways on the early timeline going forward. But what's stunning is the fact that when you look at this I just lost my train of thought. Where were you at, Ronnie?
John, was Larry in Germany up till the night of the 20th?
Yes. Okay, I'm glad. Yes, his own account on numerous documentaries in his own book, he said he was returning from duty from break on the 27th, going into the 28th. He then said that on the night of the 28th, he returned to duty on his first midnight shift. Well, first of all, D-Flight worked 3 swings, 3 mids. Now, what you might find interesting, and this would add to the fourth night, when I call the third midnight shift at D-Flight, but the fourth night of the incident, so we don't confuse people. Larry on Phenomenon Radio, you weren't there for that particular interview, Linda. You were off on assignment. But Larry came out and said, and it shocked me, he said, well, you might be surprised to know the only night I ever worked flight was the night of the incident. And I'm like, what? And if you go back and look at the interviews he did, he said he'd been working flight for over 2 weeks.
Right.
But other people had said that he had never worked flight. He was injured, okay? And he did eventually get discharged, and it may have been tied to his injury. Now, if you fast forward, Battram and some of these other people that were out there could have been back office. Matter of fact, J.D. Ingalls was mentioned to being out there, Ronnie, right?
That's right. I mean, Battram was back office anyway.
Yeah, and so was J.D. Ingalls. Yeah. What could have very well happened, and I hate to bring this up because this is going to start another row probably, but you have to be honest when you do research. Was it possible that Warren was in Germany, returned from Germany, never was on flight because of his injury? Sunday, because Larry originally, his very first early interviews, he said he was recalled from the dorm. He never said anything about working. There's no way, based on his own account on the book, on some of the documentaries he did, in his own book, he said they returned off a break. Well, D-Flight was working the first 5 nights. They worked 3 swings, 2 mids. The last midnight shift was the 28th until the 29th. If he was assigned to D-Flight and working, the only way that he could have been on that night at all, which would have been Sunday night, and the money would have been if he got recalled from the dorm or was pulled because he was working back office, because he would have had to have worked the 5 days before. He could not have been on break. He just had been assigned to the base. He never would have had the time off during that time frame. He would have had to have been present on duty. So by his own admittance, he was not working the first 5 nights. So magically he's going to come to work, but he said that was his first night back, and they worked further on going forward. So my take on this, if Larry was involved at all, he was called out there with some back office people and could have been involved in that night. Because as you said, Linda, on some of his interviews he did early on, he described a lot of the same things Adrian did that he saw.
Yeah, and that you're saying, so we're clear with the audience, we have locked in from midnight to sunup on the 26th of December, 1980, the 27th, the strange night when Taplin, D-Flight, lost her position because of something happened in the forest. The third night would be you out there with Monroe Nevels and with Bruce Eglund and Halt and that group. And then midnight to sunup on the 29th could be the fourth night.
Right. And they would have come on duty the 28th, went through the morning of the 29th. Halt hinted at the fact that some of this stuff may have taken place on the 29th. His memo says that. Adrian, in his interview with Georgina, said that. And what was funny, and I can't find it. I've searched for this, and I didn't get to listen to one of the interviews she did, It was posted. She did after the book came out, and I did get to go through it all last night. I found out about it last night. Was that she was under the impression after, I don't know, it was after she knew she was sick or got sick and then didn't say much anymore. She felt there may have been another night. She talked about this towards the end before she passed. And even I think I remember at one point she came forward and said, after talking more to Bustinza, she came to realize there could have been a fourth night. And
that was
tonight's
conference, John.
Right. Tonight would have been an important night to try to get through all that, because if in fact there was a fourth night, you can't rule out the fact that Larry Warren may or may not have been involved.
Right.
And the fact that it's so much different. And I was always confused. Wait a minute, Adrian. If you're running around doing all this on our night, I was out there, never saw the British, never saw the film crews, never saw any of that. And all this stuff took place. How could I have missed it all? And what you've encountered, there's no way I could have not have heard about it or known about it. But the only explanation I've got, and hopefully we can get him on and we can talk about this some, is there may have been another night, and this may have all taken place.
And John, it would also accommodate that photograph, the very important photograph that Georgina used in her book, Don't Tell the People, and that is the police officer, the Suffolk County police officer, is there with one of the men from the base, and they're taking photographs where there are 3 triangular marks on the flat surface surrounded by trees that appear to have discoloration on their trunks. And that photograph might have been taken on that fourth night, because that would have been the presence of the police that you didn't see on the 28th.
No, I think.
Go ahead.
I think that was on the morning after your event. That first.
Right, I think so. I think because Captain Verano was involved.
That's
and
right.
Stuff, and Captain Verano and Gulius were out there. I think that may have been Linda. But what I find intriguing is if you go into the Larry Fawcett interview,
right,
and you go through it, one of the things Adrian was clear about, okay, was he said Williams was not out there. He said that Halt was the one, okay, and then he goes into some details about the encounter he had, but it's clear Colonel Halt was involved in this. And the big question of this is Colonel Halt knows a lot more than he's been talking about. Right. He went out of his way to discredit Adrian and I early on, then through good work by Georgina, because unless I'm wrong, Ronnie, because you know the timeline pretty well, was Georgina the first one to get the cleaned up tape and the really clear tape?
Yes, she was. Yeah, she got the first generation tape, not the actual one what was Holt took, but the first copy off there. Because up until that, all the copies that were available were pretty poor.
Right. So she got a very clear tape. And when I listened to the interview she was doing with a radio show in England, they played some of that tape, and it was so clear. I haven't heard it that clear before.
Yeah, she got it from Sam Morgan, but she also had some work done on it as well.
Right, and I think I even think that night that producer cleaned it up a little bit, modified it so it was better. But it was stunning, and it brought back feelings to me and stuff. But the bottom line was when you listen to the tape, Bustinza, you could hear him on the tape. He was running around doing stuff. Now, what's funny is one of the questions was, how could Adrian be with Halt the whole time if he was doing some of this other stuff? So even today, Halt's not being honest about it. Adrian wasn't with him the whole time on our night for sure. And God only knows if the fourth night happened or the third midnight shift, there was an incident. Where was Adrian part of the time? But he denied Adrian being involved at first, and he denied that to Georgina Bruni. She did a conference. It wasn't the Leeds one because the clip that we put out there she said that Halt said Adrian wasn't out there, but the tape proved otherwise. That tape also, we have Airman Burroughs and 2 other personnel at our location requesting the rendezvous, and everybody gets this messed up. Sergeant Ball said, not Halt, not at this time, we'll let them know when they can come out, okay? So we had the initial evidence that was going on, okay? So then, lo and behold, and this was part of when, besides that going on, Halt then tried to do the cover story. Well, guys, really, he was there, but he never went with us, never was involved in our party, on and on. I think he told Linda, didn't he tell you at one point that he talked to me on the phone that night and I never went out there?
Yeah, I think so. And it was odd because his story has changed in so many facets over time, Colonel Halt. And I have had the impression that he has tried occasionally, like in 2009, when he stood up in the UK with Gary Heseltine and they put out an official press release. And he said on the record in 2009 that the lights and the beams that he encountered in the forest were of unknown extraterrestrial origin. That was the phrase, and that was the press release. But before and after, he is tread around even his own words on that. And I think that you hit the nail on the head tonight when you said he knows a lot more. I think that it's becoming clear there probably was a fourth night. And that they've let the 3 nights that people have testified, but they don't want anybody to know about the 4th night.
Well, not that, but they didn't want anybody to know about the fact that Adrian and I were there and that we went forward and that we got close to something. And now he's finally, because one other thing that came up that was ironic, and I've always found this ironic, but I'm going to tell the story. I can't remember which conference it was, but I was with a conference with Kevin Randalls. And Kevin Randalls came up to me and said, John, I have a tape recording with Halt doing an interview saying that you went forward of his group. And I'm like, really now? So he says, let me burn it. I'll get it to you. So he mailed it to me. And then I listened to the interview and I got back to him. In 1991, before Halt separated from the Air Force, Larry Warren and Peter Robbins sat down with him outside the Pentagon and did an interview with him. And during that interview, Warren and Halt were arguing about who was there, where they were, and who may have been involved with this team and got forward. Halt slipped up and said, no, Larry, you were never in front of my team. You were never with my team. But John Burroughs did go meet up with our team and go forward.
Yeah.
Now, I have that tape. So some of the stunning moments that Halt could see the walls were crumbling down was, believe it or not, when we came back from the UK, Linda, when we did that. Right. And in 2011, when we were all at the Open Minds Conference. Yeah. And I met with Halt privately in his room. And there would have been that whole snafu where Halt was rude to you and Peniston broke away from you on Thursday night. Then Friday, but I met with Halt when I got there on Saturday. I'd been in the hospital, and I met with him, and I went in the room, and I said, Colonel, I have you on tape admitting that I met with your team going forward, and Adrian was involved. And his eyes looked at me, and he's like, okay. So then he came out, and we talked about Tampa a little bit, and he announced to the Open Minds crowd that Tampa, and there was another night. But he still hung on to the story, even in an interview as late as 2013, where when I challenged him directly on it, he said, no, John, remember, you never came forward and met with my team? Well, finally, in his book, that he just put out, he openly admitted for the first time that Adrian and I did go forward. Then what he did say on an interview he did with Kevin Randalls was, and he told me privately, he said, you went forward, we could see you, but I can't say what you said didn't happen, but I don't remember it that way. So it's taken, 37 years for him to finally admit that Adrian and I went from not being out there at all to now, yes, we did go forward with his team.
Yeah, and it is important that people realize that this is the fact that is confirmed by Adrian and you, but look at how many pivots that Colonel Halt has made over the nearly 4 decades, and that probably what he is hiding is this hypothetical 4th night in which there was a whole bunch of more people, and that might explain the description in the Georgina Bruni description that there was a craft, a literal craft surrounded by military.
Right, and there's also a part where this is a timeline that, and I want to talk about this real fast too, but I'm going back to the UK in May, and we're going to, in the next week or so, announce the exact date. But when I'm over there, I'm going to do some more research on the MOD files and everything else. But I'm also going to speak back at the Woodbridge Town Hall about some of this, about some of my stuff and some of the stuff that's happened since. But Ronnie's going to do a presentation on the timeline that we're working hard on to put together. And there was a point where it came up about not only was the craft there, but there was a request to get some parts from the base.
Yes.
Okay. Now, if in fact that didn't happen on my night, I'm just telling you that right now. There was no way that all happened. Now, can I say that didn't happen on a different night? No. But these were always the things that were nagging at me. This just didn't add up. The different stories that were coming out, the different things we're talking out, even Halt's memo, if you think about it, it was jumbled. It was jumbled. All the nights were put in like a blender and jumbled together. So which night was which? How did this all happen? He said it first started on the 27th. What happened on the 26th? Interesting enough, Larry Warren, when he first came out, followed the memo. So did Peniston even. Peniston went forward. Peniston's notebook said the 27th, right, Ronnie?
That's correct, yeah.
Right. So there seems to be some kind of confusion, or was it deliberately done that the dates were always jumbled? And did it go deeper than FOIA? Did it go deeper in the fact that we never did want to come forward and get the whole story straight? And without guys like Ronnie that have taken hours and hours of their time to go through old interviews, old documents that we're going to introduce in May, then this would all just be a big jumbled mess. We're open tonight because we understand now that this could open up the whole thing with Larry Warren again, and was he ever out there at all? Because if you remember, Halt did say at one point he said on more than one occasion Warren could have been involved in the fringes at one point.
Yeah. And there's something that's really important to throw to Ronnie, and that is when we sat eye to eye with Adrian in Texas in 2010, toward the end of our long discussion, he seemed to be trying to communicate something to us in between the lines. And between your questioning and my questioning, John, I remember how Adrian finally said, it was like he was agonized over saying this, that he was subjected to chemical hypnosis and that he knew others that were subjected to chemical hypnosis at the base, and that this was something that he was never, ever supposed to bring up. And if a bunch of the people beyond Peniston were subjected to chemical hypnosis, could it be that some of the confusion and blurring is because of that?
I think for certain it is, Linda.
It very well could be. And what happened when Richard Doty came on our show in November, he talked about a report, and there was somebody that put people under hypnosis to try to make sense of all the events, okay? Now, recently I've challenged Richard Doty publicly because he told me he'd look into this, or he knew who the guy who did hypnosis was, and he also knew about part of the report that had been released. What I was able to straighten out today was that still haven't got my hands on what may have been released that this guy particularly had, but I'm going to try to track this down further because I feel if there's any part of that report out, even if it's heavily redacted, that report should be made public for people, researchers to look at, number one. Number two, I really am calling on Richard Doty because he seems to like to listen to our show. Richard, you said you would find the hypnosis guy and get an answer from him one way or another. How about it, Richard? Let's get this guy on the horn. Let's get this guy out. Let's talk about this. You're willing to come on our show and talk about 250 plus pages of a report you saw. So obviously you're not worried about the fact that the government's going to come after you for that stuff. And you talked about a classified report. Why don't you come forward, do due diligence, come forward and get a hold of this guy that did the hypnosis, get him to come out and let's talk to him, and let's track down whatever part of the report that this guy supposedly had, and let's get it out to the public. And once and for all, let's get the witnesses together, including Colonel Halt, based on a good timeline that we could put together that Ronnie's working on, and let's go through this and solve this case once and for all. There's no doubt something took place. We now have some evidence that maybe there was another night, what we call a fourth night on the third to midnight shift. We have one of the airmen that was involved on the flight said incident took place all 3 midnight shifts. We have some other information showing it could. The story that was told by Adrian definitely is different than him and I meeting up and going forward. I don't believe Adrian's ever lied. I think he's tried to talk about it. If, in fact, he was supposed to mix the stories up. Even Monroe Nevels has had trouble because he struggled with dates and said, well, it was Sunday night. No, it was Saturday night. But if there was 2 different events back to back, like Saturday and Sunday night, and your mind has been messed with a little bit, you're going to have trouble separating them.
And John, it would be very interesting here at this point to ask, Ronnie, have you ever talked with anybody who had either direct information or circumstantial information that chemical hypnosis was used with some or maybe even all of the people involved in the 3 nights or 4 nights?
No, not been told to me, but I can tell you this, Linda. When I first heard about this incident, which was in the new year, the guys used to come up to the club where I worked in Great Yarmouth. I'd known them for weeks and weeks and weeks, got to know them, introduced them to girlfriends and one thing and another, hung out with them from time to time. Whatever happened on that incident changed them guys completely. So I can't think how else that could have been done if it was not either with drugs or with hypnosis. Because when they first come, they told me what they'd seen and what they'd heard. And the next time I saw them, they denied not denied, but seemed as if they didn't know what I was talking about.
There is something that alters memories. And there are chemicals governments use to erase memories.
Right, but to think of this another way too, Linda. What did Condine say when you have an interaction with the phenomena, what it does to you?
Manipulates your mind.
And your memories. Right. Now, would this not be ironic because of what Doty hinted at? We went out there. These incidents took place. And then when we come back, we are having trouble or not talking about what we remember and what we saw. And did they bring us in not to interrogate us the way it could be because they won't talk about it one way or another, but were they trying to make sense of us? And Doty hinted that we were not put under to be interrogated, but to see what we could remember happening.
Yeah, it's possible for sure. That would fit the Peniston account of his hypnosis.
Correct. And did the phenomenon itself, because in the Condon report it says that's what happens.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, did that scramble us up? And was the government themselves desperately trying to find out why we couldn't even come back and talk about what we remembered or what happened?
Yeah, it is. Because Adrian, that was the most agonized moment in that 2 or 3 hours that we talked with him in 2010. That was his most agonized moment toward the end when he said, I don't remember if he said it was sodium pentothal, because that's short acting. I've always been puzzled by that. That's not what you would use for long hypnosis sessions. But it was a chemical hypnosis, and he said to us it was used on me and others. That's what he told us.
Right. And I'm going to go to a portion of Fawcett's interview since we have a little bit of time. Okay. He did talk about, he said, and I want to bring this up so I can read this little clip.
Can I just say something while you're looking for that, John?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Sergeant Smitty's just popped up on my computer, and he said he was there the night of Bonnie Templin, so that, we're perhaps going to find something else out about that evening off Smitty. And also, if
he's listening to us right now,
he is, yeah.
please get in touch with Linda and John on. I have a bunch of information on Bonnie Tamplin, and I would really love a reality check. And you could email me at earthfiles@earthfiles.com, Smithy, and then we could set up a time to talk. And I'm happy to share with you some of what I have.
And the other thing he just said, Linda, is just going by what we were just talking about, he said his memory of the whole incident is muddled up as well. So there you go.
Right.
Well, and not only that, but there was a lot of people, like even Egershek said that he was sure it happened over 3 nights, but he said at one point he heard me on the radio, but there's no way I could have been out there on Sunday night into Monday. I wasn't out there. I was off duty the first 2 mid shift anyway. I missed the first one with Tamplin. I found out about it when I went up to the desk. But then the second part of it was I did go out there trying to figure it out for myself and ran into all of Halt's team and everything. So there does appear to be a jumbling of it, but you can't get past the details. And one of the things he said, Adrian said to Fawcett was that they did talk about electronics. It's in the interview. And he said, what about the other guys with you? Did you see anything besides Larry? And he says, AB, I really Burroughs. I'm trying to debate Burroughs. I'm not sure. I remember somebody taking pictures, right? Yeah, well, we know that. The guys used to have pretty good confidence in me out there, and I don't know. One of the guys told me that he had taken a picture. They confiscated the cameras from some of the personnel there in the film. I can't remember if Burroughs or the other guy. They said I switched to film. I got to get my film out of the camera. So even back early on, Adrian struggled with where was Larry? How was his involvement in it for sure? Where was I? Was I out there or not? When was I out there? There is a interweaving of all these events that took place.
And
now,
Rick Bobo up in the up in that tower up over the nukes. I'm just going to say because they were there, the tactical nukes. He said that in listening to the radio traffic, and that he's seeing that big red, blue, and yellow sphere, and he saw from it came white lights, little white lights came down out of this big red, yellow, blue thing and went right down into Rendlesham Forest, and he was listening on the radio traffic, and he heard your name, he thought, John Burroughs, mentioned, and that he could hear Colonel Halt, and that would place that after midnight on the night of the 28th, if you're there.
Right. And I want to go into something else that I just was going through the Fawcett interview, which supports this now more than ever. Okay. Because I haven't had time to look at all this. Ronnie spent more time. He goes, yeah, the plane flew in. I remember they called for security right off the bat and happened to be on duty. And I set the security. Was that the same day? No, because we've been working. Because we had been working days in. It was in the swing, so it had to be about 3 or 4 days later, because then we went on our 3-day break. Well, then how long was the machine there then? I really don't know. And I mean, as far as out in the field, yeah. When we came in contact with it, 2 nights it was there. He goes, and I went off my 3 days off after that.
There you go, 2 events.
Right. So
on what dates would they likely be back to back?
Well, again, I think personally, without Adrian coming on, but I have to believe the Bowen night that she talked about was the Tampa night, which would have been the first midnight shift, which would have been early in the morning of the 27th.
Right.
The main Halt incident that took place with the tape and everything else that's been released took place early in the morning of the 28th.
Right.
We even have a radar confirmation from Eastern Radar that Bentwaters called at 0325, that they called and we're talking about a UFO event, and did they say anything on radar? Okay. Then the third night, because he said the machines were out there for
the fourth night now. Are you going to
the third midnight shift? Okay. The fourth night, but the third midnight shift, which Egersek said there was incidents in all 3 midnight shifts. The fourth night, the third midnight shift, which would have been on duty the 28th, going into the morning of the 29th, would have been the night that some of the story of what Adrian described. But he said, again, way back early on, he goes, well, then how long was the machine then there, Larry Fawcett? Adrian Bristenza, I really don't know. I mean, as far as out in the field, Larry Fawcett, yeah. Well, we came in contact with it 2 nights. 2 nights it was there. I went out there on 2 different nights.
And it would make sense that Adrian was there the 28th and the 29th.
Yeah, because D-Flight was working their last mid, coming on the 28th, going into the 29th. But there lies a discrepancy with Larry Warren's story. Number one, he claimed he was on break. So how could he have been out there on the halt night when he clearly was returning from Germany? And he said he was on break, and he didn't return to duty until his first night was this first mid back. You didn't come off a break and go to mids. You went to swing shift. So if, in fact, Larry was out there at all, it would have had to been out there on the third midnight shift, the 4th night of events, that he did describe a lot about what Adrian Bristenza said took place. And most likely, Larry wasn't on flight, but the fact of the matter was he probably got recalled, like he first admitted way out back early on that he got recalled from the dorm. They called some people back from the dorm to go out there because of the fact stuff was going on again, and he ended up getting drawn into this.
Right.
Yeah,
and he said, he told Ben Jameson and me that when he found Adrian crying on that bunk bed, that Larry promised Adrian that he would tell Adrian's story.
Right. What were you going to say, Ronnie?
Well, Adrian doesn't tell it like that anyway, because Larry says that Adrian went to him round about in March and April and told him to get his story out. Adrian says that he went there the very next day and slipped a piece of paper under his door. So
right, that's in the Larry Fawcett interview too, correct. And there also is a spot where Adrian said he met Larry on the stairs. And that was when
that was after the first night.
No, that's the problem, Ronnie. I think it wasn't. I think it was he met him on the stairs Monday morning. Because everybody talked about being involved in CSC or being called up to talk to Ziegler and all that stuff. What I'm trying to say, folks, as we close out the show tonight, and I wish Adrian could have been on here, the amount of people that were involved in this incident that were claimed to be debriefed, including D-Flight, if in fact they were debriefed on Sunday, they never would have worked Sunday night. They could not have had a shift with a full shift based on those personnel. So my best guess is there was a 4th night, the 3rd mid. Then after they went on break on Monday morning, that's when all the investigation started. That's when the debrief happened. Peniston talks about how Monday he was brought up and debriefed, too. He was called in early before the swing shift. And Warren talked about seeing Peniston in the dining hall. Well, Jim was not around on our 3-day break, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Jim went up to a small town north of Bentwaters. It was near Chicksands because his wife's family lived up there. So Jim could not have been up there on Sunday. So it all makes sense that a lot more happened probably Sunday night into Monday. And that they really started the thorough investigation on Monday with people being interviewed and everything else.
And we'll do another upcoming Phenomenon Radio, John and Ronnie, on this new 4th night evidence.
Yeah, I think we only just scratched the surface tonight. If Larry Warren was involved, and I agree with Holt on this, I think he was involved in the fringes because Adrian has said on more than one occasion that he saw him there. Steve Longero has said that he saw him there. Well, Steve was on C shift, right, John?
Right, but see, if they recalled the dorm, Dorney.
Yeah, right. That's the point I was then going to make. He would have been recalled in the dorm, and that's why he saw Larry there, and Larry saw him there.
Right, right.
Adrian doesn't remember picking up anyone from perimeter post 18 at the end of Bentwater's flight line, and there isn't, if you look at his testimony, there's no time for him to have done that anyway. So I think perhaps Larry may have been involved, but it wasn't the way he's told it.
Right, and just like Holt Halt hasn't been honest about everything he knows and what took
Nope.
place either. So on that note, I wish Adrian could have been here tonight. We'll get him on, get him scheduled in the next month or so, and get him on, and maybe we can clarify some of this. But Ronnie, thanks for filling in.
Yes,
Linda,
thanks.
we had to operate off the cuff, but hopefully we've got some stuff out there that people will start to look a little deeper in.